Hello everyone, in this video session we are going to focus on chapter 8, writing research report. But first of all, let's have a look at the outcomes of this unit. At the end of this chapter, you will be able to explain how to choose a research topic, write a structured abstract, know steps for writing introduction and principles of writing paragraphs. Secondly, you will develop competence in writing research design, choosing sample or participants, discussing research instruments, and writing the data analysis section. And finally, you will also be able to develop skills in writing discussion, conclusion, and recommendations. First of all, in academic writing, you need to have some basic skills, and these skills should include writing an introduction, background, or review of literature. Your introduction, your background, and your review of literature is probably the most important start of your writing research report. And you also need to have some knowledge about the theory, some different research perspectives, approach, and research methods. Then you need to be writing about designing and developing measurements. You need to be writing about participants. You have the necessary writing skills to describe your participants. After that, analyzing the data also requires different writing skills. If your research is qualitative, you will have different writing strategies. If your study is a quantitative one, you will use different writing strategies while analyzing your data. And in presenting and interpreting results and findings, of course, you need to have some basic skills, because in both qualitative and quantitative data, presenting these findings differ significantly. And writing discussions, conclusion, and implications also require distinct academic writing skills. Also, you need to be familiar with how to suggest for some further studies at the end of your research report. And basically, at the very beginning, first of all, you need to choose an original topic to research. You are already familiar with all these issues, deciding on the topic, writing research questions, and etc. And for your abstract, you are familiar with this term, because when you read an article, you can see an abstract at the end, just under the title, and it includes a summary. It's usually a paragraph including 200 and 300 words or less, and it usually gives a summary of the research paper. And while writing an abstract, you need to focus on 5 major points. The first one is the problem statement. You need to write, why do we care about the problem? Why this statement, why this research study is important in terms of the literature. You need to state this problem in your abstract. Secondly, you need to mention about the purpose of your abstract. What is the overall purpose of that study? You need to make your reader familiar with the purpose of your study. And you also need to mention a little bit about the basic design of your study, which is about the methods. And then you briefly mention your results and findings. Especially you choose the major ones in your study and which you think are the most valuable to mention in the summary of your research. And finally, you come up with certain conclusions and implications, and you need to answer what is your concluding remark in the summary of your research study. And that paragraph should be around 200 or 300 words, and it needs to present a brief summary of your research report. And in writing your introduction, this is the first part of your research report. You include your research background, research problem or research statement, and you include your research questions as well. And while writing your introduction, you need to be careful about the fact that you summarize prior studies about the topic. You also should explain how your study specifically addresses the gaps in the literature, its significance, what is its contribution. You need to state them explicitly. And also you should note the broader theoretical, empirical, or policy contributions of your research study. And all these include your introduction part. And while writing both in introduction and in literature review, it doesn't matter, you benefit from certain techniques, and probably the most important one is paraphrasing, which refers to restating something written by someone else in your own words. When you look at that original text, for example, it's a long one. It talks about Block and colleagues' studies, but when we paraphrase it, we can do it in one sentence. Block and colleagues describe that jurors' own memories influence their decisions, and we give the reference. Okay, this is called as a paraphrasing. You try to summarize a longer part of paragraph or text in shorter one with your own words. You can also benefit from quotes, which is a group of words taken from a text or speech and repeated by someone other than the original author. We can use some other authors or scholars' words or paragraphs, and we can put them directly in our text, of course, by giving references to their studies. And before our literature review, we need to synthesize the articles. It is possible to synthesize multiple articles in one paragraph. You can detect their common points. You can create some short summaries of them. If they are referring to the same topic, same focus, you can synthesize them in the same paragraph. You also note the shared issues across the articles that you want to call attention to. Please note any important differences that are relevant to your study, because you will use them while writing your literature review, and you can describe each article briefly in ways relevant to your study. You can mention all of those articles that are relevant to you in 2 or 3 or 4 sentences, and you can combine more articles in one paragraph if they have some common topics and foci. In your literature review, you need to follow 3 main principles. The first one is the main objective. You need to justify the research project by evaluating the state of knowledge on the topic. And you need to focus on what has already been said or written in your research area. Your literature review should cover other studies that were conducted in your own research area. Secondly, you should also identify a main argument, and you should provide the evidence needed to identify your main argument, specific hypothesis, and to develop your guide for gathering. You should have a clear argument, and you need to collect all evidences from the literature. And also you need to present basic trends and patterns, and for them you can refer to the basic patterns in the articles and books in thesis, so that your literature review can be more thorough. And probably the heart of your research report will be the methodology section, in which you mention your research design, research samples, data gathering instruments, materials and procedure, validity and reliability, and data analysis part. For example, in your method section, if your research is a quantitative one, you need to mention whether it's a survey design or experimental design. If it's a qualitative research, you need to mention whether it's grounded theory or phenomenology or ethnography. All those research designs are written under research design in the methodology section. Secondly, you need to describe your sampling strategies, and you need to give some information about your participants under the title of participants. Thirdly, you need to mention about your research instruments. If you are using a questionnaire or test, you need to talk about psychometric properties and the items of these instruments. If you are using some interviews for the qualitative data, you need to mention which questions you are using in these interviews. And in the fourth part, materials and procedure, you need to write about your data collection process, how you collected your data. And then you need to state how you ensured the validity and reliability process of your research instruments. You remember the validity and reliability issues were really important in terms of your research study and its quality. And finally, you need to mention how you need to mention how you analyze your data, what kind of procedures you followed if it's a qualitative one, what kind of analysis techniques you used if it's a quantitative one. All of them are mentioned in the data analysis section. And while presenting your findings, you can benefit from different ways. For example, if it's a quantitative study and if you have some hypothesis, you can present your findings as hypothesis 1, your findings. Hypothesis 2, the findings related with hypothesis. Or if you have some research questions, you can present your findings under the title of research question 1, research question 2. If your study is a mixed method one, and if you are benefiting from both qualitative and quantitative research data sets, you can present your finding in terms of the research method, such as findings of the qualitative data. And the second title would be findings of the quantitative data. You can use those titles. And finally, you can also benefit from the chronology of your data collection process. The first phase, the second phase of data, third phase of the data, just like this. And while presenting your findings and results, of course, you can benefit from tables and figures which will make your reader, which will provide some easier documentation of your findings, and your readers, it will be very easy for people to read your findings. And in discussion, conclusion, and recommendation parts towards the end of your research paper, this is probably the longest section, and it is worth spending some time because it brings everything together. You have an introduction sentence, you restate your problem of statement, you review a little bit your methodology, and you need to summarize your main results and major findings by giving references to previous research. And more importantly, you have to discuss your results in line with the literature. This is the finding of my study. It is parallel to previous research, or it contradicts with previous research. You need to discuss your findings. And based on these discussions and findings, you need to present some implications and suggestions for further research and practice. And finally, it will be better if you mention about the limitations of your study in the conclusion part. And in this session, we briefly focus on how to write a research report. We touched upon basic academic writing skills. We talked about how to write an introduction. We also focused on the major principles of a literature review. We focused also on methodology part, what to include in this methodology section. We talked about how to present our findings and how to present our results based on our research design. And finally, we talked about the discussion and the conclusion part of our study.